adapt to the slight. Well, only put critical answers on the very edge where they're hard.
You know, I've got the 4. You promised it to me.
Oh, did I? That was a long time ago.
I know, but I haven't.
There has to be some sort of statute of limitations on that one. No, that's true.
Okay.
That's nice.
Actually, we didn't. This was not the topic we talked last time. Where did we leave it off last time? Say it again. Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. I knew it took a right turn somewhere.
I also suggested time travel.
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll pretend we went back in time and finish that portion of it, and then we'll go to time travel.
Well, no matter when you go, for God, it's now.
That's right.
Saw some of that.
Well, I can start on the. We'll start on the corporal punishment topic just quickly, and then I don't know enough about it. I think I can summarize a key point fairly early, which is everybody says that they would prefer not to do corporal punishment, but parents say that some parents say they find it necessary. So necessary for what? Presumably, it's necessary to develop character and adequate compliance, the compliance of the child which you take to be the character building. Now, first, there may be a problem baked into that because just because you make a compliant child doesn't mean that you built their character. What you may have simply done is either cowed them to such a degree that they won't do anything under your observation. But we don't want children who behave when they're around you. You want children who behave when they're not around you. God is interested in followers who, I forget who the quote was originally attributed to, but true character is what you do when you think no one is watching, kind of idea.
Yeah, also compliant. I don't like that. I want a child who's compliant to me, but I don't want a child who's compliant, and therefore I really don't want.
Well, yeah. So I don't teach children of go find an adult and do this other stuff. I'm like, no. Yeah. There's a trusted list of people that I will issue to you each time who have clearance to deal with.
To always question authority.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's.
I don't mean to shrink from responsibilities, but I mean I have seen children raised by the best Christian parents who followed well the principles, and they didn't spare the rod and spoil the child, but they didn't abuse the child. They were strict, but they were teaching the Bible, and they did just everything right. And I've seen these children turn 18, and the day after they turn 18, they're off.
So the question is, how do you prevent that from happening? A lot of most of the proponents of corporal punishment turn around and say one has to be adequately strict, and that strictures require corporal punishment. So what I'm trying to do is at least raise the following doubt on that front. Now, my children are not old enough to use as a comparator on this one because the oldest is 10 years old right now. But we have out of them both the compliance and what we think is the character that we want, and we didn't do corporal punishment. Now, why? I'm an old Marine. Getting beat down is a part of training. It was a norm. I went to a course in Colombia called the Lancero course that they call the hardest school in the world, or the hardest school in the Americas, depending on who you're talking to. And we've had SEALs go through it who said, I'd rather go through BUD/S twice than go through that course. Mostly because they're old school, abusive on it. They literally beat you with sticks, and you crawl through tunnels of barbed wire. It cuts your uniform completely off, so you're basically get out of the end of the tunnel that's eighth of a mile long probably, and you're wearing nothing but basically your underwear and the boots, and your back's all cut up. It's that level of abuse, and that does not produce in a soldier any more discipline than they had beforehand. All it serves is for a filter to find out the ones that can make it through that kind of stuff, which I think is really probably its intent. So why do we feel the need? There are two reasons. There are three reasons. One is it was done to me and therefore I'm doing it because that's the right way to do it. A lot of our ideas about the default setting for the human being of how you should do task A is however you learn to do task A. And usually as a child, that's by observation. So the one thing we have to note is it's usually the default setting that we go back to without thinking about it. So if you're going to think about it intentionally, there are two remaining motivations. One is it seems to me the Bible supports corporal punishment, therefore I ought to do it. The other one is, none of this other stuff I'm doing is working, so we'll beat it into him kind of idea. Nobody says it that way, but that's basically what it boils down to. On the biblical version of it, I would say, I'll suspend a lot of the discussion solely to say it's at least conceivable that the rod of discipline is intended to say instilling discipline in the child. And back in the day, it was done kind of that way. But is that the only way to do it? And I think that the answer is no. Like if God said, we in the Bible, we can, it is apparent to the eye, from what we can see in the universe, does that mean that we're not allowed to use telescopes or electronic telescopes? We have to use the naked eye. No, nobody thinks that. So is it, I ask the question, not saying, comparably the case that what God is looking for is don't let your children be undisciplined. So what we realized were, at least for us, were three things. One, for the younger child, discipline is a skill, and it has to be cultivated. So in the same way that you can't expect a child to read, or you can't expect a child to tie their shoes, or you can't expect a child to play soccer without education and training, you can't expect them to regulate their own emotions without education and training. Now, emotional regulation is not the same thing as discipline. It's part of it, but it's not the only thing. But when your 3-year-old starts to melt down, you've seen both options, right? With one parent who's tyrannically difficult on them, and the other one who's just like, oh, they're 3-year-olds, that's what they do. And the kid is a holy terror in the grocery store, and you're like, somebody needs to talk to the parents. And maybe the parents need beating at this point. The answer to that, though, I have found is very simple. And it is a zero tolerance policy. And it's not a zero tolerance like I'm going to crush you. It's like, nope, we don't do that. And if you interrupt unwanted behavior immediately, and you remove them from the situation, you put them somewhere else, and you change their emotional state, that works. And in some ways, that's what corporal punishment does itself. But you don't have to do that. So what we have right now are two, and I'll use the word compliant or obedient, whatever you want. The bottom line is I say we do it X way, and the child's like, okay. And I have 2 children. You've seen them both in here. Seth, the older one, who is like, whatever I want him to do, that he proactively seeks how to do it. Easiest child you'd ever want at this stage. We'll see what happens later, right? When he figures out dad's a knucklehead. That's probably going to change. Jesse, however, is mini-me, right? It's like, he is a Horcrux I didn't mean to intend to create when I killed Harry Potter or whatever it was, or his mom. This kid is exactly the same, and he is very not anti-authority, but he wants to be the one who's in control and sets it. So I recognize that about the 2 of them. I'm like, one of them, all I have to do is look at him and be like, buddy, and he'll be in tears. The other one, if you're like, I don't want to do it that way, but he's like, but I do want to do it that way, and explain it to me. He's the one who asked me, I think because we were explaining, like we had seen a raccoon in the backyard or something else, and we'd see deer in the backyard, and I had explained, people hunt deer, but most people don't hunt possums or whatever else and eat them. Somehow we'd gotten around to, like, I don't know how they heard it at a very young age, but like, I don't think anybody mentioned cannibalism or like people as meat, but I think we talked about like muscle as meat, that's meat as muscle. And so he thoughtfully at like 4 years old was like, Dad, do we not eat people because the meat doesn't taste good? And I was like, wow. Maybe, but that's not the principal reason. So the guy is willing to question anything, right? So the way to raise them was very different, but neither one of them required corporal punishment, and both of them are highly compliant or obedient. Like at this point, I can literally look at them and be like, hey, and it's instantly there. Some, like I said last time, I can just put my finger up if they see it. The other one, the second one, is so in his own world. Sometimes you have to give the one snap, and he looks up, and you're like, and he's like, he immediately is like, I have to desist some behavior. I'm not sure what it is, and it's entirely peaceful, right? I don't send these guys to the room. I don't do anything like that. If you just don't tolerate at all, and explain it to them why. So we explain it in this context of love. Hey, listen, you want your brother to treat you this way, that means you need to treat him back the other way. That's what's loving is. We want to be loving here. So when you explain it in terms of loving, something about them does get loving. So, and the hypocritical, like, is that what you want them to do to you? So If you explain things to them and don't over-explain, I'm guilty of over-explaining all the time, as you might imagine. Explain appropriately for their age, but then I'll go back and one last comment for the 2-year-old or the 3-year-old. The easiest solution, like here they're doing something, you're like, this is a character problem, we need to work on it. No, what you need to do is turn him upside down and tickle him. And then when he's laughing about it and the tears are gone, you're like, hey buddy, let's not do X. And you just put him down and it works. So, you don't need to there's zero reason to get into a contest with your children at ages 10 and below. It should be, not tyrannical. I provide the guidance, you work under the guidance. And at this point, none of them are in the, like, why is your authority relevant here? Now, I have explained some of it to them, but I will tell you that they don't care. It's generally down to the really, really big guy says that this is the way it's going to do it. And, he seems to have been in charge since the day I arrived here, so I guess he's in charge. They haven't gotten to the question of, like, should he really be in charge yet? We haven't gotten to that stage yet. The Praetorian Guard have not started asking questions. So I'll tell you that it is built-in automatic no matter what the personality is. And I have 4 very different personalities between these kids, and it works over at least the range or domain of those personality types.
While I'm child here, I read something, what was it, a post on Facebook, about a mom explaining why her kids ended up being created. And she said, it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of time to never hand them a screen just to get them busy. You teach them to find and you cultivate in them a desire for learning, a desire for creativity, a desire to explore what's around, and that's, nowadays, that seems to be, my kids are almost missed that. We held off on getting a gaming system after most of their friends had one for a long time.
So I'm one leg in each camp on this one. I know, I know our interaction with screens. I think it's a powerful thing, and anything that's powerful can be addictive. And so I am. One thing you can do with screens, by the way, is they become a powerful motivation of like, let's get all our educational stuff done, and then you can do X, and that motivates fairly well. I also think it's the case that you can pick the right kinds of things. Like we're actually not anti-screen. If you think about all the topics that we talk about in here, maybe 80-90% of them come from something that we saw in a YouTube video or somewhere else. So we're actually learning. I'm assuming that what we're doing here is good. Yeah, that's an assumption.
We keep coming back. So.
We keep. Well, yeah. So did do some of the evil people. I'm sure so did the Satanists too. The Satanist temple, right? So just because people keep coming back doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Oh, yeah,
but I think that it's a powerful tool for learning. I mean, the older among us will remember when we had to think about going to the library to go look in the card catalog to find the location of something that's no longer in print anymore, and we have to go to the microfiche to go draw it from the librarian to go put it in the microfiche thing and then roll through 374 pages of completely unreadable microfiche in order to find the one reference that disappointingly didn't answer our question. That was my experience with knowledge, 40 years ago. This right here is like incredible. Now the problem is 99% of what's on here is incorrect. So it's a sifting, a sorting process.
Yeah, but the other problem is that the way it's filtered with an agenda.
Yeah, usually I don't cut off ways paths that we go down in solid ground, but don't get me started on that one for this one. Okay,
Google is terrible with Christian topics. It's not just, it is specifically Christian for all the reasons that we know it to be, but it's also everything else. I mean, and I think I've told the story of how the peer review process worked for my wife, who she and her team wrote a really well, obviously I think, written, well-justified approach in psychology, but it made corrections to an earlier view. And who did they provide? Who's one of the reviewers for it? This guy. And who was the principal reviewer because it was his field. So all the other 3 or 4 reviewers deferred to his view, and he's like, "Oh, this is nonsense," and he was completely wrong. And they basically gave it back and were like, "We're not going to publish this." And Tracy was like, "What? How?" And her advisor, Raj Makers, was
was like, don't worry, this is how it works. We submit it to this other high repute journal, and they published it instantly. So, the peer review process is absolutely a human.
What that other guy said.
Not necessarily just because at a minimum it wasn't filtered through that guy. So it is not. It is a human process. It has all the foibles of human process limitations, and additionally, I reference you to Veritasium or Veritasium, whatever how you pronounce it, where he's like, let me show you why, out of ignorance, and anybody who's taken a statistics class can identify with this kind of ignorance. All these great scientists don't understand statistics, so they end up p-hacking their way to bad, unreplicatable studies, etc. Okay, yes, sir, and then we'll go to time if we have time.
It's interesting. As a parent, I felt like I had a responsibility to see my children attain mature adulthood with similar values to myself, to pass my traditions and my values. Having 3 children, like you, broad spectrum, I had one child that I needed to establish some discipline, or they would self-destruct. I didn't think they would actually be a mature adult. Another child didn't respond well to discipline, but I had no worries. It's interesting how they all turned out.
Well, I'll piggyback on this one right here. He touches on something I should have said. This to me is, if anything, the second most important thing. First is set the standard of love to be the standard in your household. The second one is it almost doesn't matter what you teach them. It matters what you do, because they're going to copy you.
Absolutely.
That's the hot take.
And
So my second son was really, really interested in learning how to snap his fingers. He saw it. He was like, this is cool. I want to try it. He worked really hard to do it. I didn't think it was something he was interested in. I found out 6 months ago why. Because when his little sister or brother is doing something that he knows is wrong according to the family standard, he goes, and I'm like, oh, okay, I see what's happening. So, whatever you do, Colin Powell is given credit for this quote. I'm sure you got somewhere else. The one thing I've learned is that soldiers watch what their leaders do. You can give them classes, you can lecture them forever, but it's your own personal example they will follow. That is a leadership. That's a leadership principle that it almost doesn't matter. Almost nothing else matters. They will remember what it is that you did, and that's what they will.
That's true in corporations. That's true almost in any organization.
Okay.
Can I put a question out there that I don't necessarily need an answer for, but I just want it to be floating around about children?
Yes.
Some of us have been bad parents. I was a bad parent. I won't go into any details, but the fact is that my children grew up, and some of them are just surviving the world. Some of them are doing fairly well, But the point is that even the ones that are doing just fine, I don't expect to see them in heaven. They don't know Jesus Christ, and I can't tell them about Jesus Christ, because to them, what Dad says doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah.
Because I was a bad dad. I was an alcoholic, and at one point even homeless, not taking care of them at all. And those things have quite changed, and I give all the credit to God, but at the end of the day, I can't tell my adult children about Jesus Christ.
So I think there are 2 things that you have to do here, and one of them, by the way, is going to be common to all of us, whether you are an alcoholic or whether you think you're walking the right path the whole time. Firstly, we can't forget that even though God has made us the parents and He wants us to be good parents, it's not like if we mess it up that He's going to be like, oh well, I don't care enough about the children to step in and help if it's possible. Like, they're still His children, so He wants us to get it right, but if we get it wrong, and all of us get it wrong, we get it wrong, He's going to step in and either use that or do something about it. If they, in my opinion, can possibly be His children in the future. So on the one hand, yes, we should regret when we don't do it right. But on the other hand, even though we have culpability there, we can't turn around and say, if they didn't go to heaven, it was because of me that they didn't go to heaven.
No, it's
right?
never because of us.
Well, we can be a contributing factor, but we're not the ultimate one, right? The second part, though, is all of us are going to end up in this state. So even the most compliant child, when they get to adulthood, gets to the point where what mom and dad say doesn't matter, at least in this limited scope of time or this decision or something like that. So we're all going to end up in a place where they're not going to listen to us about X. And one of the key questions I think parents ought to ask, and I'm in the state where I'm thinking about this theoretically, but I haven't done any of it, which is to say, it's normal, the way that people are raised in the Western world because of the way we do schooling and other natural reasons, that the principal influence on a kid's life is their parent, usually. Now it's moving a little bit towards educators in some cases, but it turns to peer group later, usually in the middle school to high school time frame, and if not, then shortly thereafter. So it goes from parents to peers are the ones that they are principal influence in their life, principal counselors to whom they listen, etc. So if you you may have found yourself in the situation of kids not listening to me because they rightfully rejected, my lifestyle or whatever else. So now they've got someone else they're listening to. Same's going to be true of us.
My daughter, her daughter is 8 years old at this point, so she's been a mom for a little while, and she is absolutely a product of her generation. Absolutely, she is everything that you would expect from a 21st century parent.
So,
including.
So how do you prevent her from being exactly? How do you prevent that from happening?
How do you prevent it?
And let's say this is where, if you want
we're beyond that point.
You may have to play a little chess. So I'll bring this up for stuff that you may have done in work. You have a colleague at work who has a personal problem with you or a conflict with you or whatever else. What you want to do is sit down and be like, the data are on my side. This is an engineering problem. Clearly, here's the answer. I'll just sit down with them and we'll work through it logically and they'll come to the right conclusion. But the problem is, even if you're right, they don't want to hear it from you. Whereas, so if you could imagine one possible world where you sat down and explained it to somebody that doesn't like you, or alternate, someone that they do like, sits down and explains it to them. In the one case, they're probably going to reject the answer. In the other one, they'll probably accept it. So the chess player turns around and says, can I get Timmy to go pitch this to Freddie, and now we'll get us. And we do this when we're patient and wise at work or in social situations all the time. When do we do this in social situations? Hey, person A wants to ask this girl out, but he doesn't feel like he can do it directly, so he goes and asks the friend to suggest to this friend to go, that kind of thing. Like this kind of stuff is commonly known. Can we do that with our children? And I will say, I have had an experience, and this wasn't with children, but Guy A, really godly Guy A in Reston Bible Church, is dealing with Guy B out there in the world. He wants him to be mentored and helped a little bit, but he's probably reached the maximum of what he can do. He sent me in to be a customer of that guy, right? I could have gotten this particular, goods and services from other people, but he wanted me to go back to this guy so that an additional influence was in this guy's life on a consistent basis. Right, so he's playing chess. He's playing kingdom chess. So I would suggest that it's hard. It takes a lot of patience, and it's limited in its how well, maybe not effectiveness, but it's over how much of it we can do in a given period of time. If you have direct interaction, you can just tell people what to do. If you have to influence it by multiple people, it takes a lot longer to do.
So if I could just add two.
Yeah, I like the telling them what to do part better.
Yeah, everybody does.
Just two quick things is that we forget that everyone is their own agent. And people will make agent. And people sometimes will make poor decisions.
Yes.
And you can, even a parent, can't necessarily change that.
Yes.
But what you can do is pray. And do all the things that you're talking about. And
I think there's a lot of data to support the, parent who prays consistently and fervently for their child. I'll tell you that, what I prayed for. So my grandfather was a royal jerk. My dad was a jerk until Jesus got a hold of him, and he struggles with being a jerk. I'm a jerk that the Lord got a hold of me and tries to keep me from being a jerk. Does, and then I am better at it than certainly the grandfather and so on. I prayed for God to give us a child that broke this line of jerks. And the first kid I got was a kid that's just everybody meets him is he's the nicest kid. Never in my life have I had an interaction with somebody where subsequently somebody went to somebody else and was like, Scott is the nicest person I know. There's a bunch of other, I mean, maybe complimentary things people say, but it's never nicest, right? This kid is just unbelievable. So God, that's one anecdotal example, but I know there are dozens and dozens. We would have to run the math on it to understand statistical significance, but so many stories of the parent who prayed for years and eventually the miraculous happens at the end of it. So I'm a big fan of this particular one. Okay, switching topics. I'll lay the background and then ask the question. So, because it may go some way into at least framing it. For what is time? Physical time is only ever expressed as a relationship to a change in position. Metaphysical time is a change in state.
Change in what?
State. This is the state at time t0. There was a change, and this is the state at time t1, and they are different states.
So are you saying that there are two different forms of time, or are you just stating time in two different?
I'm saying
you
that
have two.
You'll notice that change in position is also a change in state, but change in state is not necessarily a change in position. So physical time is a subcategory of metaphysical time. Metaphysical time is the broadest possible definition of time, and physical time is one of the subcategories under metaphysical.
So you're not suggesting that there might be a tear in between two different. I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying.
That's correct. What I am pointing out, I should have done this upside down, other way. So, or maybe this is the building block, and this is the next level of it.
There's no change in state. Is there no change in time?
So, I give you the following thought experiment. We've done this before in this class, so for those that have heard it before, apologies. But very quickly, he invents two different inventions. They will basically let you walk up to a place like a discrete physical location, like a store. We'll use Starbucks as an example. And one machine freezes all motion, and the other one actually stops time. And you go in, and he hooks it up to the window, and he throws the switch, and everything, all the motion in there freezes. And he takes his observations for 5 minutes or whatever it is, according to his clock, and he says, "Okay, I see what's happening," and he goes back out, and he puts that machine down. Now he hooks up the time freezing machine, sticks it up against the window, throws the switch, makes his observations for 5 minutes, writes them down, and he comes back to the lab, and he's about to encode this and be like, "This is what happened when we froze all the motion in the room, and this is what happened when we froze time in the room." And one of his lab assistants says, "Chief, I dropped the labels of the machines, and I didn't know which one was which. They just fluttered to the ground, and I stuck them on there, so I don't actually know which machine was which. Given the observations you made, how can you tell the difference? Which machine froze time and which machine froze motion?" And the thought experiment is meant to highlight, in the physical world, they're identical. There's no difference whatsoever. There's not a single property difference between freezing time and freezing motion. They're identical. And per Leibniz's law, any two things A and B that don't have any property difference between them are the same thing. So at least in the physical world, this is an idea that goes in that direction. It doesn't establish it. It's not an argument. But in the physical world, the idea is motion and time are identical. So as an example, if I told you, like maybe in our minds, God froze all of creation for 1 million years, and then he started it back up again. And by the way, he did it just as I was saying that. So we're now all 1 million years older than we were 10 seconds ago. What does it mean? How do we know the difference? And the bottom line is, if nothing moved at all, anywhere in the universe, if there's no comparative physical time, then it's completely meaningless. It doesn't, whether there was 1 million years in between or no time whatsoever in between interval A and B. For us, it's identical. It's the same. We wouldn't know the difference. And we wouldn't know the difference because it has literally zero effect on reality, on physical reality. So, but you'll notice in order to do that, I had to set up a clock outside the universe.
Right.
Which is why delta P, all clock, if you think about all measures of time, it's all one motion against another. It's how much did a second hand ticked for how far this runner ran, or the cesium atom vibrated this many times. I've been saying 123, apparently it's cesium 133. I learned that this week. you have, it's always a measurement of one physical motion to another physical motion. That's just how we measure time. Okay, now that we've set that as background, your question.
So, I had an argument with a friend of mine a long time ago. Solid believer, bless his soul. We got wrapped into an axle around whether a faster than light travel, would that necessarily create a time machine? And he was of the position that yes, it does, because he described it in ways I didn't quite understand. He's talking about these light cones, and once you've exceeded, that's the space in which you can have any perceivable impact on something. And if you jumped out of your light cone, if you exceeded your light cone, then you'd be able to change the past, so to speak.
Yeah, the problem with
and that
this
just doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Well, it's the reason. Well, maybe one of the reasons it doesn't make sense is it's not really right. So this gets said all the time, and so this is an example of a light cone, and a light cone is like this right here is the speed c, and this is how far. I didn't do that very well, did I? So if you want to go from this point right here out to this point right here. So this is axis is in time. Some event happens, and this right here, the edges of these cones are defined by the speed of light. And so you might say, how far will my light wave get after some time here, t1, and this distance right here is defined by the speed of light. So that's simply down to how fast light would move in that period of time. So what he's saying is, if somehow you were moving faster than the speed of light, you would be outside of this cone. Now, what do we mean by that? You still are going in a direction, though. So this is directional. This is in one particular direction. So let's imagine we're going from here to Jupiter, or we'll go from here to Pluto. So you can stand on the surface maybe. And one person goes out at the speed of light. The other person goes out faster than the speed of light and gets there, and wants to send a signal or do something. You would turn around and say, "Okay, I see. Let's say that you've put a clock previously on Pluto, and it's sending you signals, and the numbers are going up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so you're seeing them as they come back, and you're traveling now towards them at some speed up to the speed of light, and you see these signals coming in. If he kind of got there earlier, it's possible for him to interrupt those signals, and so when it should have been counting 1005, 1006, he changes it to count 2005, 2006. So you would see this, you're watching the surface, and you see this, say that he went kind of a long way around, came in from the backside, so to speak, and you see this jump. You would see him basically approach from the backside and appear at a time where you would have calculated he could not have gotten there. The fact that you can calculate that he shouldn't have gotten there doesn't mean that he didn't get there because he was outside the light cone. How are you going to send a message from inside to outside the light cone and back outside? You can't. So this is why, in my opinion, this view doesn't matter. What they're talking about is you can make changes that would beat the promulgation speed of gravity. You can make changes that would beat the promulgation speed of another light signal traveling at the speed of light. But that doesn't change, it doesn't actually change, it's not time. It doesn't change the event in some uncaused way. All it does is mess up what you think that the speed at which certain things would occur and the order of events ought to be. But if all you've done is said, like right now, the reason we define this edge right here is because we think that's the fastest anything can go in the universe. If it turns out that this is the actual speed limit of stuff in the universe, all we did was get a bigger possibility cone. Just because it's not a light cone anymore, because you're traveling faster than light, doesn't mean that it's not a possibility cone. And the possibility cone, a change cone, is why the problem right now is our definition of time is based on the speed of light. So it does mess up those time calculations because time is based on this is how fast light travels in a vacuum. If you don't do that, you don't have the problem. If you turn around and just say time is change, comparatively. You just need to compare it to what its fastest possible promulgation speed is. It's how you're setting your basic units.
I also think that's sort of related to the maybe to the whole Schroeder thing. You know, Schroeder box, cat, the whole idea that the probability function doesn't collapse until you open up the box. That doesn't mean that it literally is both things.
Right. Schrodinger's point was this is ridiculous and it can't be true.
Right.
Right.
And so similarly, just because you haven't detected it, you can't physically detect it because you can only detect things at the speed of light.
Yeah, he brings up a really good point, and that this is in fact this is the answer, which is the people who say that kind of stuff are stuck in an operationalist or a positivist approach that says if you can't tell the difference, then it doesn't it's meaningless. Yeah, meaningless. It literally can be both. But to any philosophy that bites off on the concept that a contradiction is okay has given up. Like you can't think anymore if you've given up.
I think it's a misinterpretation.
The other thing that I point out for this kind of reason that I think that is relevant is in no possible version of this one are you violating the mass energy content in the universe.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, Marty McFly goes back in time and then he comes back to the future, hence the title, and he sees previous Doc and Marty, and then there's current Marty there. Where did the atoms of the time traveling Marty come from? Where? Like, in order for that Back to the Future style time travel to work, you violate the total amount of mass energy in the universe. You have to create matter and energy in order to do that. So that's not possible. Therefore, that time travel isn't possible. If you assume that you can't create mass energy.
Matter and energy of the fishes and the lotus come from.
That right there is a true, like, we added matter and energy to the universe kind of miracle.
But
presumably he could have done it another way, for all we know, like he cut the grass half a centimeter all around everybody and used that matter. Who knows, right? Ridiculous to even think about. But the bottom line is, we talk about the matter and energy in the universe as constant because we use that as an assumption. That, by the way, was not a scientific assumption that everybody assumed. The number one competitor for Big Bang Theory for a very long time, the one that eminent physicists and astrophysicists believed in for a while, it was argued up into the YouTube age. You can find these videos on YouTube where they talk about galactic clusters that you can see that appear to be creating matter as we speak. And they say matter is created and added to the universe all the time. So the universe is expanding because something's creating matter. So the total amount of mass energy in the universe is increasing over time. It's not constant. It's entirely an assumption. It's not an assumption that we know. Now, most people have pointed out, like, yes, that's true. You can see this thing happening, but that's because you're seeing it through, like, basically a hole in this galaxy or nebula or galactic cluster, and it's something happening very far in the past. Normally, it was the sign for it was these really, really high redshifts that shouldn't be in these galactic clusters or galaxies that are much lower redshift type of stuff. And other astrophysics said, now you're looking through the galaxy, you see another distant object.
So one of the weird things about that, and I'm just thinking at this point, the famous Einstein equation equals mc squared. Mc squared, the c, includes time, right? It's meters per second, right? And so that equation actually involves time. And you wonder, okay, if you're adding to the mass and energy needs to stay constant, then you need to subtract. The only other option is c, right? And so you're playing with time in that regard, or you're playing with energy, neither of which makes sense.
Yeah.
You get yourself all wrapped around the axle and doing some crazy math.
Yeah, and it's based
just
on
a curious thing.
It's based on special relativity and general relativity are based on a completely unprovable assumption.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable, but it's that the speed of light from me out in that direction is identical to the speed of light back in this direction. So it assumes that the universe has no directionality, has no difference. That may not be the case. It may be that the universe has a particular structure to it. It may be spherical, and that the speed out from the center is not the same as the speed into the center. We don't know that. Turns out there's no way to prove it.
The laws of physics could support in some way that we have failed to catch on to yet a kind of theory that allows light to go away from you at a certain speed and to return at a different speed, without necessarily invoking directionality, but simply invoking different equations that we have not stumbled upon yet.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's agreed that we've got some problem at the base of physics, but nobody knows what it is. The stuff we've got works really, really well. So, but they don't fit. The pieces don't fit together. So everybody's looking for the new physics.
Scott saying hello.
I am tired of hearing physicists say this. If anybody wants to, at some point, write me a card that you can guarantee is going to upset me. You can put 2 phrases in it. One is start with "we now know." Because whenever somebody says that, you're like, "Wow." Completely ignoring all of history in order to say that one. Yeah, that one is just, instant like.
But we now know that that's not correct.
Yes, exactly. Gosh, we now know that this is the view. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. That's a phrase that kills me every time. Okay, back to your question.
What was the second one?
I've
what's the other thing?
I brain locked it. What did we say right before? Yeah. Another physicist turns around and says, the James Webb Telescope just told us that everything that we thought we knew about early star formation is completely wrong. This is the most exciting part to me, is when we're wrong. I'm like, you are a liar. The most exciting thing is when you get it right and you publish and the Nobel Prize Committee is like, that's right, we didn't know that, you got it right. Yeah. Nobody is like, oh, we got it wrong and we got rejected from publication. That's amazing, I'm so excited. Lies, sir. Do not paw at me with your filthy lies. That's another way of just trying to spin. Like, I consider it to be propaganda, where scientists who have long claimed to be the high priests of the modern era's epistemology know now that they are wrong so consistently that all you have to do is wait 20 years and whatever you published is going to be wrong. But where they're still trying, I think, a person who knows that they're likely wrong and tries to convince people that they're right anyway, to me, that's bad character. It lacks humility. It smacks of a desire for power and influence that you know for a fact is unjustified. That is awful. And that bothers me greatly. So we now know that this makes, that we're wrong, and that's super exciting. I'm just going to be like, that's it. I'm done for the day.
Well, of course, we now know that's the worst thing anyone can say.
We do know that, correct. That's an acceptable use. All right, sorry, Michael, back to your questions.
Could you have not a time cone, but a causality cone?
I think that's what it is. Now the question, though, is what's the speed of causation? Most of the physicists today, almost all of them, I assume, will say causation doesn't promulgate faster than the speed of light. People ask this question because for a while there we were assuming gravity was an instantaneous influence. Subsequently, we've come to believe that gravity acts at the speed of light as well. So is there any speed of causality that's faster than the speed of light?
Isn't quantum entanglement faster than the speed of light?
That was the question, was whether spooky action at a distance was occurring. And
was there any follow-up on that?
I dismiss this as a complete waste of time, because I think hidden variables is very obviously the solution to this one. And when we understand the basic nature of what it takes to entangle particles, so we act like these entangled particles didn't take a lot to get them entangled in the first place. And by the way, they had to be geophysically proximate to entangle them. You can't entangle particles at a distance that aren't already connected by your causal or light cone anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, all you've done is put them in some synchronization. And when you pull them apart, it's the natural synchronization. They're just in opposite phase. And so when you pull them apart and you measure phase 1, it's not that phase 2 collapses. That's if you buy that. But on de Broglie-Bohm pilot wave theory, the reason that thing is out of phase, 180 out of phase with this one is because you linked them up and you phase matched them, or phase 180 matched them, and then you pull them apart.
Can you change the spin on one and have the other one change as well over a distance that's you change one deliberately and the other one changes over a distance faster than the speed of light?
Well, number one, there's no way.
Yeah,
it's a measurement thing. It's not a.
It is what it is. You're not changing it. You're measuring it.
Right.
Did that help?
Well, if that's true, so let's think about two cases. The case where that's right, where it's simply a measurement. Well, let's say that you change it and that this one is spin up, you measure it as spin up. So now you think that the other one is spin down, and then you change this one to spin down. Does that change the other one to spin up?
Or once it's spin up all along?
It also, but there's no way for you to know without crossing the distance between the two of them, which means whatever field you're working in, the influence of that field. So you flipping this one, for all you know, the field delta happened and changed this spin as well. So I'm saying, how would you control for that in a way that allows you to violate your ability to communicate in this light cone kind of thinking of being able to know the answer to that one, irrespective of time. So it's Heisenberg. Well, Heisenberg's idea, touches on that. That's right.
Yeah, that's what
So to my mind, like, quantum mechanics is problematic in that we keep trying to force it in. We've got 14, 15 different interpretations of quantum mechanics, and half of them are deterministic. And we completely ignore the deterministic ones because people, I think for philosophical reasons, want the non-deterministic versions to be true. And there's just no evidence that that's the case.
One final question, and then I got a flight to catch. Got out early, but just shortcutting all of the fun discussion about it. I'm just curious. Do you think time travel could eventually be possible?
No.
No.
I don't think it means.
I'm sorry, not time travel, but faster than light travel.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
For all I know, it's possible.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of particles that we think seem to do that on occasion.
Well, it's all
Right.
I don't disagree.
It could be the plug. Where
it's
there was
just
no-
that everyone that has ever come up with a particle that wouldn't.
It
turns
never
out,
works out.
It didn't actually happen.
Right. Well, I'm saying that there's no.
There's
So-
nothing saying it couldn't. It's somewhat of an arbitrary asymptote, but
Yeah, I do think
We
that the
haven't seen
physical universe is probably made up of, has a field associated with it, a fundamental field. And if it has a fundamental field associated with it, there's probably a max speed of causality in that field. And so if it's not the speed of light, it's something one step further. For all I know, it is the speed of light. But I would say it's possible. Whether it is the case is I don't know. It's possible because we can conceive of it, right? Can we conceive of something moving faster than the speed of light? Yes, therefore it's possible.
I can conceive of a time machine.
Not consistent. You can't conceive of a time machine that also that doesn't end up with a contradiction in it.
You mean like around chicken and the egg kind of thing, or?
Or there's a number of different contradictions you would run into, but let's say like Marty McFly and Doc. So they actually deal with this in the Marvel universe, where they point out the flaw in Back to the Future version, which is if you have gone back in time and you come back to the future, the fact that you interacted with those people changed the causality of what would have sent you back in the first place, right? So the Doc that saw the Marty out there that opened the letter never would have done the things that he had done in order to get him there in the first place. Or alternately, when that came to be, you now have the two. And this closed time loop of the traveler includes the person that has the knowledge, the new knowledge, that he potentially would have shared with this person. So it turns out that that's actually a different future. It's not the same past and future of this person. So it's a different timeline. The wizard lady with the bald head, she carves out a separate stream off of that flowing time, three-dimensional kind of example, and says that's a different future. And then that's where Bruce Banner grabs the thing from the one thing and puts it over here and says, here's how we would go about doing it. But that falls to the same
Well,
problem.
Marvel did it broken, but Lane Craig says the movie that got closest to how it could be was like Bill and Ted's movie. Because they just have to think like, make a note that like we're going to use a time machine to come back and put a bucket like over this door, and then the thing falls and it was like always there.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. So it's like everything that like nothing changes in the future. It just was always the way it was.
I think the other problem there is, in order to do this, you conceive of time as a dimension. And
It would require
a physical space dimension. But it's not a physical space dimension. Time is simply a state of change.
What's the implication of omnipresent with respect to time?
So I have argued, I've had to change the way that I articulated something. In the Trinity paper that I wrote, maybe originally or at least recently, had said omnipresence requires necessarily that God exists in time. But that's only if you conceive of time as spatial. So what we changed it to is an omnipresent being would have a presence in a physical, temporal world, which then potentially puts him in time. I think necessarily puts him in time.
So how do you define omnipresence?
In all places.
At all times.
So the reason I'm asking is, Craig would say that
it depends on your view of time. How you would answer that question?
Craig would say have knowledge of and causal ability at every location in time, but that's not necessarily.
That's the way I put it back in the past. I don't know that Craig says it that way.
Craig says that.
Does he?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that God is literally in the atom of the chair.
Yeah, I brought that up in the example of like we're in a video teleconference with somebody in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So I have not heard Craig make that point, but I agree with that.
I've heard him say that multiple times.
Okay.
Maybe in his class, in Defender's class.
We're in agreement on that point for sure.
Okay.
Why can't God be in every atom everywhere?
He doesn't need to be in order to be omnipresent is the point. It's not that he can't be.
Okay.
It's he doesn't need to be. What does it mean
my own personal
the question was, what does it mean to say you're physically there? Like, are you physically here?
That depends on the definition of
What's
some terms.
Yeah, that's the point. So, you're physically here, but I would say, like, you're not here. Do I just draw a line around your body and say you're there? But when we say physically, what we really mean...
From your perspective, I don't exist at all except in your mind.
No, I'm not talking about that kind of... I'm talking about if somebody accused you of shooting me in solid ground today, and your defense was, I wasn't there. I was not where Scott was.
Okay.
And the policeman's like, what do you mean? You'd be like, well, I only occupy the space that my body occupies. And that's not the space that Scott's body occupied. So I was not where Scott was, so it clearly could not have killed him. And the policeman is like, okay, philosopher, what I meant to say is that you were causally connected to this one by physical proximity. And that's what we mean by here. His point, Craig's point, maybe my point, maybe Craig got it first. I am a cryptamnesiac. So he says, or let's say Craig says, if God has knowledge of what's going on and he can cause change there, then he's present. In the same way that you were knowledgeable about what's going on and you caused change by shooting me.
Is it a distinction without a difference?
Well, it depends on whether you think a dead man versus an alive man is a difference.
I think if you claim that God is in everything, then he becomes the creation, right? That's an issue. And then what happens when I throw a rock? I'm throwing God. So you end up with all these weird oddities when you say God is in everything all the time. Those are just silly examples, but you do end up with these odd aspects of, is God the creator or the creation?
In my particular worldview, God sustains every law of physics everywhere. So God keeps the electrons rotating around, and he's actively...
That would be a causal relationship.
That would be exactly what we just said. Because you have knowledge of and causal ability at every location. That doesn't mean you're actually, or God is actually...
Well, I guess he's saying God is like active.
See, I'm saying he's actually doing it. He's actually keeping all the...
But that doesn't require him to physically be there. So let's imagine for a second that Jesus is sitting over there. And he's got all divine powers, all of them. And so you want me to fall off the chair. We're going to have Jesus push me off the
So
chair.
I can just
because
put
I can't
some
think
momentum in all your atoms and poof, off you go.
Yeah, so he could do that without touching me. You've got to physically touch me to do that. So you physically have to be present in order to do that. He doesn't physically have to be present here.
I'm still
So he can do it from 10 meters away. He can do it
because
from 10 miles away. He can do it from 10,000 light years away.
You know, if I can sit across the room and in some way do is the only word I can think of, do something that gives all your atoms momentum to go sideways and you fall off your chair. I just touched you, essentially.
But not physically. As in, you didn't take.
Well, I mean,
what I mean to say is this:
all your
there didn't have to be a
substance.
there didn't have to be a co-location of your physical being and my physical being.
Well, it had to be a co-location of something that I have.
Right, but in that case, it's power, which is what he said.
Okay. I won't go any further. I'm just going to state for my final word is, to me, it's a distinction without a difference.
The difference is the difference between telepathy and not telepathy.
Okay.
I wouldn't put it back like that definition.
No, but that is right. Telepathy assumes that you can make
For today, I can
that
only
you can
nod.
move a cup without
Okay.
touching the cup with your physical stuff, and that's what.
For today, I can only nod assent.
Okay, fair enough.
Did you want to go over A and B theory time? People?
Yeah, you can. We can talk about it. I don't actually love either. I don't think that those are the only two options. So, but most people in here know this one. But if you don't, A theory of time says the past was real, the present is real, and the future will be real. B theory says that it's all a big loaf, and that we're just at one particular slice in it, but that all of it exists, like as a brute fact. That's the 10-second difference between
I don't see how God could be anything other than
A theory.
your second
B theory.
B theory.
The traditional Christian philosophical view is A theory.
I have no idea what traditional Christians believe.
Yes. Well,
I
A
only
theory of
know-
time is one thing, so now you have some idea. The idea is that the past is not as real as the present is real.
Huh?
In that it's not
See,
real
I get a
now.
different story
It
from
was
the Bible.
real. It is not now real. The future is not yet real. So if I said, like, this thing happens in the future, you'll be like, well, has it happened now? No, it hasn't. So the reality exists in the present. It's in some viewer versions of this.
I get a
present
very different story from the
view
Bible.
is similar to this.
From the Bible itself. I mean, Christ was sacrificed from the, I'm quoting, from the foundation of the world.
Yeah.
That means that event, which for us happened 2,000 years ago, was happening in some sort of time which covers all of the time that we're familiar with.
Yeah. I would view that as an
Did I make sense?
It does. You did, but I would view that as an unjustifiable extrapolation of a
Yes.
term that we don't know is meant to be philosophically and mathematically rigorous.
Yeah, I think that is viewing the Bible somewhat anachronistically, in that we know some things. We've got these ideas of physics that the authors of the Bible certainly did not have, and so to imply that the authors of that scripture intended to say that there was that was what was going on, I think is probably reaching.
The best example I would give of why this matters to God, and therefore it probably is real, is when bad guys are doing bad things, and people are like, these guys are doing bad things. God should do something about it. And God says, I am going to do something about it. But their iniquity has not yet come to its full fruition, or the fullness of yeah. So the idea there is like Minority Report. We're going to arrest you because you're going to commit a crime, and we had this philosophical problem with it of like, but I haven't. And they're like, well, in the future you do, so therefore you have. Like somehow that feels wrong.
But since you've arrested me, I'm never going to do it. But why are you arresting me?
Because you were going to. We know that you would have in some possible future, right? So that's a great point. In God's world, even though He knows they will do this, He doesn't interrupt it and say you're guilty as a result. He waits until they do the thing in order for them to be guilty. So it seems to be, based on that, maybe important to God, which is why I think maybe it's a real important thing.
It's also in judgment, which time slice of you it's judged. Like, what is the enduring thing that's linking these like separate slices together?
And to me, the slices are fictional, so they don't really exist.
Descriptive. Is that a good adjective?
Yeah, it is a description, and it's not a thing. It is a description, and real, and virtue of being a description, but it's not a real thing in and of itself. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, the principal questioner left, so we may not be wanting to address the time thing too much. But
Seth has a good point in that in the B theory, there is not enduring self.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
That means that the person who blew through a red light yesterday, just say I did. I'm not saying that I did, but maybe.
Right.
It's up to you to figure it out.
To decide whether that's accurate.
And broke the law is not the same. There is no continuity of self between that person and the person who's sitting there. So how can I be guilty?
The person
And I think that's a
in
valid argument against the thief there. Right. You know, it does remove liability from everything. It also somewhat messes with the infinitude of God, you know, because you're saying the creation is real throughout all time, always was, always will, if you will, which is kind of a weird thing to say in itself, as was God.
Yes.
So there are some conflicts there. I would say that your point is a very interesting verse. It would take some cultural information and possibly language information to decipher more of what it was intended to say, and I would suspect that those are hyperlinks, if you will, to the aspect of this person is indeed God, and struggling with the idea that he is a person and yet he is God.
You might also want to consider how much the Holy Spirit knew when he was influencing that person that may not have understood the thing that they were writing. I think there's a passage in Scripture that specifically talks about, well, it talks about the writers looked forward but didn't see what, you know, and I think that kind of says what I'm saying right now, which is I don't think that authors necessarily needed to understand the things that they were writing.
So that's a question of inspiration. Yeah, and that's an interesting topic.
You know, so if God, okay, for example, the first verse of the Bible is a great example. Okay, nobody can know that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth unless God tells them. And so God told Moses, and so Moses wrote that down, not out of his own knowledge, but out of knowledge that God gave him. So the author, we know who it is, but the author who said, you know, that Christ has been crucified from the foundation of the world, didn't really have to understand what he was saying when he wrote it. That
assumes that the first 5 books of the Bible were written in the manner that you said, which is Moses was sitting there.
Yeah, I'm going to make that assumption.
So it could be the case that there was word of mouth stuff that went all the way back, and Moses is citing oral tradition for all we know.
I don't think that changes. I don't think that changes the discussion.
Say it again.
I agree. What you're saying may very well be true, but I don't think that it changes the discussion.
No, it doesn't change the discussion, but it changes the conclusion that says God, like another way that we could know, but to your point, it just backs it up from Moses to Adam. Where right. God has to be like, hey, the way I just did before you got here, here's what went on in the first 5 days.
Yeah, and you can drive the knowledge back through generations rather than having it go directly to Moses, but it's about where it comes from.
That's right.
It comes from somebody who does know.
Isn't that a universal truth?
However,
I think yes. But
this is an interesting conversation. We're out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time.
It's true then based in that culture, and it's true now based in our culture.
So let's bring with you for next time whatever topics you would like to discuss. Again, we are in the special summer session of Solid Ground where we can go as deep on. So if we want to drill down on time, by all means, we can do that the entire summer if we want. But if you want another one, also bring that one too. So thank you all very much. God be with you this week, and we will see you next